There are people who wake up every day and put on a smile that doesn't belong to them. They laugh, they talk, they work, but deep inside, something quietly eats at them. It's not sadness. It's not depression. It's something colder, quieter. The feeling that they are fundamentally broken, and no matter how much they achieve, they can't silence that voice that whispers, "You are not enough." This kind of self-hatred rarely arrives suddenly. It grows over years through moments of rejection, humiliation, and comparison that slowly turn inward. It begins when someone teaches you, directly or indirectly, that love must be earned, that to be accepted, you must be flawless, and that being yourself isn't good enough. For many, the roots lie in childhood, when affection was conditional. When mistakes were punished more harshly than they should have been. A child doesn't question love. They question themselves. They don't think, "My parents failed to love me." They think, "I must be unlovable." And that belief quietly poisons everything that follows. As adults, this belief evolves into perfectionism. They work harder, perform better, and chase achievements not for joy, but for relief. Every success becomes a brief escape from the voice that says they are worthless. But that relief fades quickly, and the cycle begins again. Self-hatred wears many masks, for some. It looks like arrogance, a desperate attempt to convince others of their worth. For others, it's isolation, a quiet retreat from the world, to avoid the pain of being seen. But beneath both masks lies the same wound. The fear of being truly known. People who secretly hate themselves often live with an inner critic so cruel it would sound abusive if spoken aloud. They replay every flaw, every failure, every awkward moment, like evidence in a trial they can never win. Even when others forgive them, they refuse to forgive themselves. Because deep down, they believe they deserve to suffer. Compliments feel uncomfortable. They either dismiss them, or turn them into something negative. If someone says you're beautiful, their mind replies, "They don't really mean that." If someone says I'm proud of you, they think, "They'd feel differently if they knew who I really am." Their life becomes a balancing act, maintaining the illusion of being okay, while internally collapsing. They might appear confident, social, or even successful, but when they're alone, the mask cracks, and they crumble in silence, because pretending to be fine is exhausting, and self-hatred never sleeps. These people often become overachievers. They fill their schedules, drown themselves in goals, chase every external validation possible, but no matter how much they win, the satisfaction never lasts, because they're not chasing success, they're running from themselves. Others go in the opposite direction, giving up entirely. They withdraw, self-sabotage, or choose failure before the world can choose it for them. At least that way, the pain feels like control. Self-destruction becomes a twisted form of self-protection. The common thread is shame, unlike guilt, which says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "I am wrong." It's the quiet conviction that something inside you is permanently flawed, and that no amount of love, achievement, or therapy can fix it. Shame doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers through self-deprecating humor, fake confidence, or endless apologies. It's the invisible weight that makes people say sorry for existing. And it thrives in silence, because silence keeps it alive. These individuals often feel undeserving of kindness. When someone treats them gently, they grow suspicious. Their mind looks for hidden motives, waiting for the moment love turns into rejection again. Because they've learned that affection always comes with a price. They crave connection, but fear exposure. They want someone to truly see them, but not the version they hide behind. The problem is, they believe that if anyone really saw them, they'd walk away, so they keep pretending. Trapped in a loneliness they built themselves. Relationships become emotional battlegrounds. They either cling too tightly, desperate for reassurance, or push people away before they can be abandoned. In both cases, they end up confirming what they already believe, that love always leaves. And so the cycle continues, deeper and darker each time. Some of them find their identity in being useful to others. They become the helper, the caretaker, the one who listens to everyone's pain. Because if they can't love themselves, at least they can earn love by saving someone else. But even that becomes a quiet form of self-punishment. When they finally rest, the silence feels unbearable. Because silence forces them to hear the thoughts they've been running from. So they distract themselves, scrolling, drinking, working, anything to avoid being alone with their own mind. Their busyness is not ambition, it's escape. The irony is, these people are often deeply empathetic. They notice small details, sense others' emotions, and feel the pain of the world more intensely. But that same sensitivity turns inward and becomes self-destruction. They are kind to everyone, except themselves. They seek validation not to feel proud, but to feel less worthless. Every compliment is a temporary anesthetic, but the effect fades, and the craving returns stronger. Because you can't fill an inner void with outer applause, social media worsens it. They see filtered perfection and assume everyone else is living without pain. They scroll through highlight reels, comparing their worst moments to others' best ones. And the voice inside whispers again, "You'll never be like them." Self-hatred often disguises itself as humility. They downplay achievements, avoid compliments, and call it modesty. But it's not modesty. It's the inability to believe anything good about themselves. They don't see their worth. They only see their flaws magnified 1,000 times. The brain starts to believe what it repeats. If you tell yourself long enough that you're unworthy, your mind builds a world where it's true. Every rejection feels like confirmation. Every success feels like an accident. Even when they start healing, part of them resists. They sabotage progress, push away those who help, or relapse into self-blame. Because peace feels unfamiliar, and the mind always clings to what it knows, even if what it knows is pain. The first step toward healing is awareness. To see the voice, not as truth, but as programming written by years of pain. Once you see it, you can start to question it. And questioning is the beginning of freedom. But awareness is painful, because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You realize how much of your life was lived for survival, not joy.com. And that realization hurts before it heals. Forgiving yourself is the hardest part, because you've built your identity around self-blame. To forgive means to let go of that identity, and that feels like losing control, but it's the only way to start becoming whole again. Healing doesn't come from loving yourself immediately. It comes from learning to understand the part of you that hates yourself, to ask it, what are you protecting me from? Often, that voice exists because it once helped you survive. The inner critic was once a shield, guarding you from rejection, humiliation, or pain. But over time, it became the abuser it tried to protect you from. It's not evil. It's outdated. It's time to thank it, and then let it go. Compassion is the antidote to shame, not blind positivity, but the quiet recognition that you did the best you could with what you had. You weren't born broken. You were shaped by moments that made you believe you were, and that belief can be rewritten. The human mind is resilient. Just as it can learn to hate itself, it can learn to accept itself through repetition, patience, and truth. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you otherwise. Some people wear confidence like armor, but underneath, they are quietly bleeding. They laugh at the right time, nod when praised, and even appear successful, yet inside, they're whispering cruel things to themselves that no one can hear. Self-hatred doesn't always look broken, it often looks perfectly put together. The roots of self-hatred are rarely born in adulthood. They are planted in childhood by rejection, neglect, or impossible expectations. When a child feels unloved for who they are, they grow up believing they are defective. And this belief becomes the lens through which they view everything. People who secretly hate themselves often live in silent contradiction. They crave validation but distrust compliments. They want love but push it away the moment it arrives. Because deep down, they don't believe they deserve it. Their minds become battlegrounds between who they are and who they think they should be. Even small mistakes feel like proof of worthlessness. They replay every flaw in their heads like an endless punishment. Self-criticism becomes their default language. They might become perfectionists, not out of pride, but out of fear. They believe if they can be flawless, maybe they'll finally feel worthy. But perfection is a moving target, and the chase only deepens the wound. Every achievement feels empty. Every failure feels fatal. Ironically, self-hating people are often high achievers. They work harder than anyone, hoping success will silence the inner voice, but it never does. Because the problem isn't the world's judgment, it's their own. They may appear kind and selfless, always helping others, but often, this kindness hides a secret motive to earn approval. They believe love must be earned, not freely given, and when it is given freely, they feel suspicious of it. They tend to over-apologize, Even when nothing is their fault, every conflict feels like their failure. They'd rather absorb blame than risk rejection, because rejection, to them, feels like confirmation. I knew I wasn't enough. At night, their thoughts grow louder. The mind replays old memories. Shameful moments, words that cut deep. They spiral into overthinking, trying to find where they went wrong. But there was never one moment. It was a lifetime of feeling unseen. They struggle with identity. Because when you dislike yourself, you never know who you really are. You shapeshift to fit what others expect, until one day, you realize you've become everyone else but yourself. Relationships become emotional mirrors. They're drawn to people who reflect their inner wounds, cold, critical, or distant, because the mind craves what's familiar. Even if it hurts. Pain feels safer than peace when you've known it too long. They often sabotage love the moment it gets real. Not because they don't want it, but because they fear being truly seen. They worry their partner will discover the truth about them, that beneath the mask, they're unlovable. Even compliments feel like lies. A person who secretly hates themselves can't accept kindness. It feels fake. They mentally reject praise the moment they hear it. Because their inner critic screams louder than any outside voice, their humor often hides darkness. They make self-deprecating jokes, not for laughs, but as defense. If they mock themselves first, no one else can hurt them. It's a way to control pain before it controls them. They struggle to rest. Stillness makes them confront their thoughts, and that's terrifying. So they stay busy, distracted, always moving, because silence exposes the truth they're trying to avoid. Many turn to coping mechanisms, overwork, or people-pleasing. Anything that numbs the ache temporarily, but every distraction eventually fades. And the emptiness always returns, deeper than before. They feel alienated in crowds, surrounded by people, yet painfully lonely. Because loneliness doesn't come from being alone, it comes from being unknown, and they rarely let anyone truly know them. Their minds distort love into transaction. They believe, if I make you happy, maybe I'll be worth something, but this bargain always ends in heartbreak. Because love given from emptiness can never be sustained. Their internal voice is cruel, relentless, and convincing. It tells them they're weak, lazy, unworthy, and over time, they start to believe it as truth. Self-hate becomes their identity. But here's the quiet truth. Self-hating people aren't broken. They're survivors of emotional neglect. They learned to cope by blaming themselves. It was safer than blaming the people who hurt them. They confuse guilt with responsibility. They feel responsible for everyone's emotions. If someone is upset, they think it's their fault. They carry emotional weight that was never theirs to hold. Their childhoods often lacked emotional safety. Maybe love was conditional, or approval was rare, so they learned, if I fail, I lose love, and that belief stayed buried for years. Their bodies even hold the memory: tight chests, clenched jaws, restless legs. The body remembers every time they swallowed pain. It's a silent map of their suffering. They crave peace, but fear it at the same time, because peace feels foreign when chaos is all you've known. It's like stepping into sunlight after years underground. It almost hurts. They might struggle with empathy toward themselves. They can forgive others easily, but never themselves. Every mistake feels like a personal failure. Every regret, a reminder that they're not good enough. Even joy feels temporary. When something good happens, they wait for it to collapse, because deep down, they don't trust happiness. They expect pain to return at any moment. Their dreams are often haunted by shame. They replay failures, lost friendships, or things they wish they'd said. Dreams become emotional echoes of their waking guilt. They can't escape their own reflection. Even in sleep, they struggle to ask for help. Vulnerability feels dangerous. It risks rejection. So they say, I'm fine, while quietly falling apart, because they've learned that pain is meant to be private. But no one can hate themselves forever without breaking. Eventually, the mask cracks. They hit a point where pretending doesn't work anymore. And that's where healing begins. Healing starts with noticing the inner critic. Whose voice is it really? A parent's, a teacher's, a bully's. When you trace it back, you realize, was never yours. They must relearn the meaning of worth. Worth that doesn't depend on success or perfection. Worth that simply exists, because they do. It's a slow, uncomfortable awakening, but it's real. Forgiveness becomes the turning point, not for others but for themselves. Because every self-hating person is carrying guilt that doesn't belong to them, and letting it go is the first act of love. They begin to challenge their beliefs. Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I was just hurt. That small shift changes everything. It turns self-hatred into compassion. Healing isn't glamorous. It's messy, emotional, and full of setbacks. But each moment of self-kindness rewires the brain. It builds new pathways where shame used to live. They learn to speak to themselves differently. Gentler words, softer tone, more patience. The same way they'd speak to a friend. That's how inner transformation begins. Slowly, they stop chasing validation. Because they no longer need others to tell them who they are. They begin to define themselves, for the first time ever. And that's where peace quietly enters. They rediscover joy not in success, but in being, in sunlight, laughter, music, small moments. They realize happiness was never gone, it was buried. Beneath layers of self-rejection, they reconnect with their inner child, the one who just wanted love and safety. They listen to that voice instead of silencing it, and the healing feels like coming home. They start setting boundaries not to push people away, but to protect peace, for the first time. No, it becomes an act of love. They realize boundaries aren't rejection, they're self-respect, and that changes everything. Their self-talk becomes quieter, calmer, kinder. The inner war begins to fade. It's replaced with understanding, not judgment. Acceptance begins to take root. They stop seeing themselves as mistakes. They begin seeing themselves as stories complex, beautiful, unfinished. Every scar becomes proof of survival. Every flaw, a mark of humanity. Love starts to feel different now. They don't chase it, they attract it, because they finally believe they deserve it. And that belief changes how the world responds. They understand that self-love isn't ego, it's medicine. It doesn't make you blind to your flaws. It just stops you from making those flaws your entire identity. That's the quiet strength they were missing all along. Peace becomes their new normal. They still feel pain, but it no longer defines them. They can sit with sadness without drowning in it. That's real emotional maturity. They learn to exist without constant doing. They can rest, reflect, and simply be. For someone who once hated themselves, this is revolutionary. It's freedom. Their empathy deepens for others and for themselves. They recognize pain in others because they've lived it, and that makes them gentle, wise, and strong. The kind of people the world desperately needs. The voice in their head still whispers sometimes, but now, they know it's just a ghost of the past. They don't fight it, they simply don't believe it anymore, and that's real power. They finally understand. Self-hate wasn't true, it was trauma. A reflection of pain, not identity. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you learned to hate yourself. When they look in the mirror now, they see a survivor. Someone who's been through the storm and still stands. Someone learning to love their own reflection again. And that's the quiet miracle of healing. Because the psychology of self-hatred isn't really about hate, it's about love. Love that was once denied, and finally reclaimed. And once that love returns, everything else falls into place. The war ends. Peace begins.